Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Introducing Harmony 6.8, Improve SharePoint Search within Outlook. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. We'll also make a recording of the webcast available within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him 18 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Before joining Harmony in 2011, Richard worked for Dassault Systems PLM for over 10 years. Richard also has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thanks, Susan, and thank you everyone for attending. So today's session really is, as Susan mentioned, a bit of an update on kind of the upcoming new release of Harmony 6.8. And some of the recent kind of enhancements that we've added to the product. So I think, you know, the whole focus, as some of you may be aware if you're using Harmony already or you've kind of like been evaluating it, the whole focus of Harmony is to kind of bring together the different capabilities from the Microsoft kind of collaboration suite of apps to make them easy to use, easy to access, and basically collaborate better with your colleagues and your clients and customers. Because at the end of the day, you know, lots of people have too much content in too many different places, and it causes a lot of confusion. You know, obviously Microsoft have introduced not only obviously SharePoint and OneDrive, but also things like Teams and Yammer and stuff over the course of the last few years, where you know you could have different platforms, different apps to use in different instances, depending on how you want to share content, who you want to share it with, and those kind of things. So it can be quite confusing on actually getting a job done and collaborating effectively. So on that note, we'd just like to ask a first poll question.
Which is, which Microsoft apps are you currently using? SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Yammer, Planner? Select as many as you're using. All right. And Richard, let me show you the results so everyone can see.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you everyone for participating. So obviously the vast majority are using SharePoint. No surprise there, but kind of like there's a good proportion of people using OneDrive, and kind of Teams, Yammer, and Planner somewhere a bit lower down. And I think, you know, that's fairly representative of most organizations that are kind of trying to utilize some of the other apps and see where they can actually bring benefit to the end users. Now, I think, you know, particularly around collaboration, whether you're using SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, etc., you can really break down collaboration in general into four main areas that we're trying to focus on in terms of, you know, getting content into the platform in the first place, whether you're putting the content in SharePoint, a team, or your own OneDrive. Actually capturing that content is quite a challenge in itself. So that's really the first hurdle that most people have to overcome is actually getting that content into the repositories that you want people to access and utilize. So capturing both emails and documents in a way that is natural and intuitive to end users is really key. And I think that's where some of those kind of tools, kind of where they're not really that well integrated out of the box, then it's difficult for people to know where to capture content and how to capture it. And then, once you're getting that content into SharePoint, or maybe you've already got it in SharePoint or Teams, for example, how do you classify it? Because, why are you putting content in SharePoint, for example? You're putting it there so that it can be retrieved and reused in the future. So being able to classify it as it goes into SharePoint, but also modify and update those classifications as the kind of maybe a project progresses, or as a legal case progresses or something, being able to actually classify that information so that people can find it and discover it is really key. Once you've found that content, also then you need to share that content with clients and colleagues to actually work together effectively. So we're going to break down the kind of enhancements that we've added to the latest versions of Harmony into those 4 main areas. So just before we do that, another poll question would be great.
So just to help us have a sense of who you are today, are you already using Harmony or using purchase licenses? Perhaps you're only evaluating Harmony, or you'd like to speak to somebody about using Harmony. So Richard, you can see that it appears that most people are using Harmony.
Okay,
and
excellent.
You can go forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. And again, thank you for answering. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like the majority of you know Harmony to some degree, whether you're already using it in the production environment or whether you're evaluating it at the moment. So as I'm sure you'll be aware, as we described, we've kind of like split those collaboration areas into 4 main areas, and Harmony supports each of those. So being able to capture emails by dragging and dropping them, or using the ribbon controls to actually get the content into SharePoint, then classifying them with various metadata, header information from emails, but also other types of metadata as the user is actually capturing it, modifying it on the fly, all those kind of things, and then being able to discover content by searching and navigating in easy ways. And then lastly, actually sharing that content using links, and also ad hoc sharing, for example, and we'll see how we're facilitating that and enhancing that at each of the kind of stages. So if we take a look at each of those in turn, let's take a look at capturing emails or capturing content, because obviously it could be an attachment, it could be an email that you want to get into SharePoint. So having a single interface in Harmony so that you can access all your SharePoint sites and libraries and your teams and things. As you may be aware that you can obviously connect to multiple environments in a single interface, which is very powerful in itself. But how do I get those sites into Harmony in the first place? And that's where Harmony already has a number of different ways to do that. Obviously, if you're centrally provisioning Harmony, you can push out registry keys so that all users get basically like the kind of default sites and things. You can use publish links to target particular groups of users to have particular sites in Harmony. Also, you can follow sites from a user's point of view in a web interface. But something that is really interesting is, if a user has access or has permission to access lots of different SharePoint sites, and that's quite common, depending on the way that your SharePoint is organized, you may have lots and lots of the site collections that a particular user has permission to access, and they don't want to see all of them in Harmony. They just want to see ones that they're actually working on. Now, obviously, as I said, we can use things like publish link sites that the user's following, so that they can go into the web interface, follow it, and it appears in Harmony. But actually, we've added functionality now so that you can discover the sites that you have permission to access directly from the Harmony interface. and then choose to add them into that interface yourself. So this kind of gives the end user a bit more power to organize the sites that they actually need to work with. So if we take a look at that in practice, let's see how that actually works. So seeing as most of you are already using Harmony, obviously I don't need to introduce the sidebar itself, but we can see here that I've got some sites that I've already added. I may have added those manually myself, or by providing a URL, or they may have been pushed out to me via registry keys or publish links or whatever. But let's say, okay, this is a subset of my sites that I've got permission to access. So I've already connected to this particular site collection in a particular SharePoint farm. It could be SharePoint Online or SharePoint on-premise. But you can see now that by right-clicking on a site, I can then say, okay, I want to discover any other sites in that environment that I have permission to access. So just simply clicking on that option there, it will then retrieve a list of all the site collections that I have permission to access. Now, in my particular environment, I have 3 others that aren't already in this particular my interface in Harmony. So I can choose which ones I want to add and add them into the sidebar. But what I can also do is I can filter those. So if I've got lots and lots, I mean, there may be hundreds of site collections that you have permission to access. You don't necessarily need to access them all. So it might be like I'm working on this Logjam Tours. So as I type ahead, and it doesn't necessarily need to be the first letter, it could be any word within the site name there. So if I start typing tours, then it will actually filter that view of sites down for me. So I can then choose that, add it in, and that will then add into the sidebar automatically. So very, very easy for me to add those, manage them, remove them, and I can organize the sites that I actually want to access. Now, again, I can take that a bit further and say, okay, I can mark sites and libraries as favorites and things. I can manage those myself as well. So if we can move on to the kind of next part of the puzzle, the classify of documentation. Again, not only as it goes into SharePoint, but also once content is already there. So as you may know, we do support all the kind of different metadata types in SharePoint, things like people pickers, managed metadata, enterprise keywords, multiple choice fields and things. So we've added some extra tweaks just to improve the kind of usability for people to actually add values to properties and things. So for example, here, if I've got a long list of multiple choice properties, then I can actually filter that view when I'm editing the property, so that again, as I start typing, it will filter it down to the values that are relevant to what I want to select, and then I can select them and easily modify those. So again, if we take a look at how that actually presents itself in the interface, so let's go into that construction site, and if we go into a document library that we're going to use for this stage, and let's say I've got a document here that I want to view the properties of, and we can see that again, all the different metadata is displayed to the user. In this case, that's editable. But actually, I've got a property here that's a multiple choice field. So if I just select that, you'll see obviously it's a reasonably long list. In certain instances, you could have hundreds or thousands of values in that list. So making it easier so that you don't have to scroll down through endless values to find what you're actually looking for. You could say, okay, I actually want to select some additional values. So again, if I start typing, in this case, if I use the number 3, it's going to just filter that for that particular value. But you see, it lets me select those as I'm actually filtering that as well. So, okay, I'm going to add a new, a couple of new values, and now we can see that that's going to update the values accordingly and save that back to SharePoint. This is something also we're going to be adding, I think, in future versions as well, just to kind of improve that kind of user interface and help people to actually get to information a bit more easier. So if we take a look at the discovering of content, because that's something that we've added a lot of functionality to at the moment, which is being able to filter by more types of columns. Now we've been over, I think, the last year or two adding filtering capabilities in Harmony. So for example, I mean, I think most people are probably aware if you click into the top of the sidebar, it becomes a search bar and you can perform a search operation. But also the views that we actually support are coming from SharePoint, but then you may want to modify those views to actually filter them on different types of properties. So in this case, it could be by the date that the document has been last modified, or by the document type, or by the username of who's been working on it, or maybe a tag that's in the in one of the properties. So we're adding more ways to actually filter by more types of properties, and also extending that to search results as well, because that's something that I think people have been asking for a while, to say, okay, I've got a search, I've done a search, I've got some results, now I want to filter those results that I've got, and I don't want to necessarily just provide more search criteria, I just want to narrow down the results that I've got to make them easier to kind of digest. So that's exactly what we've done. So if we go again into my Harmony and say, okay, now let's take another library where I've got a few more columns being displayed. And in this case, this view obviously is coming from SharePoint. It's a public view that's been created. And I can see that it's being grouped by a particular property, in this case, the project name, and various columns and properties are being displayed. So now I could say, okay, well, I'm interested in documents that were modified by a particular individual. So in this case, it could be, let's say, Fred. And I'm interested in just a certain type of document. So yeah, in this case, some Word documents. So I'm actually logged in as Fred in this case. This is my demo environment. So it might be, okay, I actually want to save that. I want to keep that as a kind of easy view. So I can then say, okay, I want to see only recent documents that I've actually created. So maybe, in the last 30 days or the last 3 months, for example. So I can go ahead and kind of change that criteria. And you'll see that it dynamically updates with the relevant information there. What we can also do is take that another step further to actually save that view, that filtered view that I've just created, as a SharePoint view, which means that it's then available to me. It's created as a personal view that I've created as a user, but it's not only available in Harmony, it's also available in SharePoint. And I can manage it from Harmony as well. So if I've created a view, if I want to modify it, I can do that from here. I can also delete the view that I've created previously, for example. So if we kind of take the scenario we just created, this kind of filtered view on these documents. So as we saw before, if I click on the view menu there, obviously there's the views coming from SharePoint. And this is now my personal filtered view. So it could even be, I want to change the order of the columns or those kind of things. And I want to save that view. So here it's just going to save it, and I can create a name for that. So let's say Fred's recent Word docs. And then, as it says here, it's going to be created as a personal SharePoint view. So it's confirmed that that's been created, and it's then available in my list of views. So nice and easily, if I move around, I can move between the views. So, if I just want to see all of those documents, or now I want to see those personal views, you'll see it's actually added as a kind of a separate section of my personal views there as well. And as I said, that's also available in SharePoint. So if I actually switch to my web interface, there's that view that we created from Harmony, and obviously I can use it. I can display it from SharePoint, likewise as I can from Harmony. As I say, I can manage that as well. I can delete it, for example. So if I delete it from here, it's then going to delete it from SharePoint as well. But it is your private view, so it's one that you created as the user. You can manage it, and obviously it's down to the end user. So finally, around kind of sharing content. So we've looked at kind of capturing, classifying, discovering, and now let's say I want to share a document. I need to send a document as a link. As I'm sure most of you are aware, it's nice and easy just to drag and drop a document into an email to send a link to a recipient. What we can do as well, which you may not be aware of, is that we can check whether the recipient has access to the link that you're sending. And also, even if they're an external user, you can grant them access as well. So we're utilizing the new external sharing APIs that were released recently in SharePoint Online, so that actually when you share a document with an end user, an external user, it will actually send them an email with a PIN code, and they have to obviously confirm who they are, and then they can access the document. So again, if we just take a look at that, how that works, if I say, okay, I've got some of these documents here that I want to send to a recipient. Let's say I'm going to send this email to Susan. And hi, Susan. And then if I could type, it'd be even better. Then I can just drag and drop, as I'm sure you're aware, the document into the email. But now if I hit send, Harmony will actually check whether the user has permission to access that particular link. And also, as I say, if it's an external user, it will grant it will give them the external sharing capability coming from SharePoint. However, you've got it configured in your SharePoint environment. So obviously if it's enabled there, it will be utilized, and you can grant that person view or edit capabilities once you've sent that link. So just some useful links on our online documentation. And if you want to try the enterprise version of Harmony, if you're not already using it. And with that, we'd just like to ask one last poll question, please.
So as Richard just said, if you're not already using the enterprise version and you would like to get a copy of it, please just answer. And in the meantime, I will ask Richard the questions that you have been asking. Richard, is it planned that site filtering feature will be added to the main navigation tree?
We're not planning on changing it at all. I mean, basically, you've got to connect to a site first so that you're already authenticated, so that Harmony can actually detect who you are and therefore return the sites that you have access to. So we've done it so that it's more of a user choosing to add additional sites. But typically, what most of our customers, what I always recommend to people to do is actually to push out the main connection, the first connection to, let's say, your root site of SharePoint, which then means that they've got something to go from, and they can detect any additional, site collections that have permission to access. We don't typically want to display everything by default because, as I say, in some environments that could be thousands of sites. It just makes it a bit cluttered. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to keep the users focused on what they're doing, not give them more kind of noise. So we've done it in the way that we've done, so that it's as I say, you need to already be authenticated against your tenant or your SharePoint instance. It does work on premise and online, and then you can choose to add it. So it's a right mouse button click, but I mean we could add it could add it as another operation, maybe on the top of the sidebar or something as well. But we just thought it was most intuitive the way that we've done it. But always open to your feedback.
So somebody's asking, is 6.8, the version you were showing, available now for existing customers to download?
Okay, 6.8 isn't released yet. It's planned to be released in the next few weeks. So it's I thought we schedule this so that we could give you a view before it's actually available. But obviously 6.7 is the current version that's available, which does have some of the capabilities that we touched on today as well.
So I guess a follow-up to that question is, if I'm not running 6.7 yet, how do I update my installation?
Okay, so I mean, as a customer, you can go to your download area, you'd be using your username and password that you'll have been sent in your order fulfillment email. And then once you've got into that download area, you can always download the latest version of the MSI packages. Obviously, at the moment it's 6.7, shortly it'll be 6.8, and then you can push that out to your end users. If you're having any trouble getting those, please contact us, and we'll be more than happy to help you get updated.
Great, thank you. How do I find out what's new in Harmony?
Okay, so obviously we're doing these kind of sessions, but also if you want to go and have a look on our website, then go to Harmon.ie. Let's just go there myself. You scroll down to the bottom here, and you can see under the support area that there's a link here to all of the online documentation. It's the link that I actually had in one of the previous slides. And you can always go to the what's new in Harmony. There you'll see what's added and what's fixed in each version of Harmony, going back, you know, as far as you need to go back. So that's always updated when a new version is actually available. So we'll update that with 6.8 shortly.
And how can I be notified that there's a new release?
Okay, excellent. That's a good question. So, I mean, basically, if you go to our blog, which you click on the blog link at the top, subscribe there, you'll then be notified whenever there's a new version. So, for example, here we can see back in June when 6.7 was released, there's an update to say, okay, what's been added and where to download it from and stuff like that.
Great. So I'm going to let everybody get an extra half hour to their day and say, if we haven't answered your questions yet, someone will get in touch with you shortly. Richard, thank you for that presentation and demonstration. And thank you all for joining us today. You'll receive an email with a link to view the webinar again in a couple of days. And we look forward to meeting you again in our next webinar. Thank you.